My dear friends, the first reading is something which is sometimes used, first of all, in evangelical circles when they are making a claim upon a soul. As you know, they challenge souls with an invitation to give themselves to Christ for all time. Always a useful exercise. But then it comes to the way in which they speak of asking the Lord to come into your heart. That is happening every time we receive Him, not in just an act of faith and submission, but also in a physical gesture of receiving that very presence. He comes into many a heart without being invited. In Catholic circles, unfortunately. This day is also a day when we can think of the halfway house, in a way, between evangelicals and Catholics, the Anglican Communion, because it is a big day in their history. They are voting this very day on whether or not to... Now, what? Exactly, but are they able? Now, I remember when we were in France discussing this question in class, and it has become, of course, by now an element of dogma. When I was doing theology, it was in the 80s, and it was not yet defined. Under Blessed John Paul II, in Ordinatio Sacerdotalis, it became, and it was strong language in the end of the document, he was actually proclaiming with his papal authority that the female was not capax. The word is capable, a vessel not capable of holding. And the basis is not just exegetical, but theological. And our Lord exercised his indication in indicating positively and objectively that he chose, passing over his own Blessed Mother, only males, choosing also a traitor over his Blessed Mother. You see how the Lord was quite clear in his positive will. And that was something which gave us the parameters. If we afterwards do our own thing, then I remember our professor in class, a holy monk who's still alive, saying, once we go outside those parameters, we can't be sure. And it was also what Blessed John Newman saw. It is, in theological terms, what is referred to as tutiorism. Now, in certain things, one can be what is called probabilist. When it comes to hearing confessions in certain things, when one has different schools of thoughts, we can use a interpretation which is probably true. But there is an exception in the whole field, and it's that of the sacraments, especially that of fontal sacraments, which have an effect on all others to come. Baptism and orders. They have to be tutiorist. It's not enough to be probably right, it has to be 101% right, because everything depends on them. Hence the discipline, which, by the way, I had too, of being conditionally baptized. One has to be 100% sure. And when it comes to ordination, when an Anglican bishop comes over, he has to be, wait for it, confirmed. He's just a layman. Now that's a statement in itself. So do you see that when it comes, therefore, to doing anything outside the Lord's will, one has not any guarantee that anything is happening. Now that, by the way, concludes forever all discussion within that field of what is politically correct. It's not of that order. It's of divine institution, and we have no power over it, and if we try to do it, it just doesn't happen. So whatever they elect to do, it just doesn't happen. And in fact, it has not been happening ever in the Anglican Church, because the crucial link, Matthew Parker, did not get it. Even though Barlow, the ordaining bishop, was a bishop from before, who had had a very elastic conscience, allowing him to navigate amongst all the tensions and pressures. But even though at 5 o'clock in the morning Bishop Barlow did lay hands on him in Lambeth Palace, Leo XIII in 1896 in Apostolicae Curae again defined that it was utterly null and completely void, omnino iritum, nothing passed. And they had to look at all the documentation, all the period, to see why it did not pass. It passed not because everything giving the indication of the intention was Calvinistic or Lutheran, and deliberately denying all elements of priesthood in the Catholic sense. Therefore, whatever happened physically, nothing passed. Remember that when it comes to the future of this elect moment in history, when they will choose or not to choose to do something which is a purely physical act, placing, if you like, a mitre on a woman's head. It doesn't change anything of the essence. Don't be taken in. Having said that, it does not mean that there is nothing there. They have grace. Because, going back to the other side of things, the evangelicals, they do have this element of a relationship with the Lord quite often. Now, remember that, because if you don't remember that part of it, you fall into the other side of things of being presumptuous and spiritually proud and arrogant in their regard. It's not of the same order. That's divine vision and relationship between a soul and its God, into which regime we have no right to enter. What I want to say this afternoon is this, my friends. We have both and relationship and objective reality. Now, what's happening in our time is this. We have become so used to what we've got that the Lord is receiving only the externals in our case as well, even though he's given the fullness of the interior. He's coming fully to every single soul. But ask yourself, how many of us are actually truly welcoming him? Now, what is happening in our time is that people like yourselves are being worked upon directly by the Holy Spirit to become aware of that and to compensate for it in something which he is asking for quite a lot in our time. Eucharistic adoration. I was in retreat in Fatima about a fortnight ago with about 100 other priests, and all these very high-powered men of God were all on the same wavelength, and it was a powerful moment of renewal. And the main speakers were exorcists, telling us things about the Blessed Sacrament. Now listen to what I'm about to say. It concerns each of you who are into adoration. Coming back to my point of departure, we have it fully. Only we have it fully. Along with our Eastern brethren who didn't lose the episcopacy, carried on the apostolic succession in the Eastern churches. But what issued from the West in the Reformation period did not. Even though Luther is known to have banged the table with his fellow theologians saying, "Hoc est corpus meum," this is my body, he did not have the power. He had it himself because he was a priest who left the Catholic Church. In fact, I tell you in Rome, which was the altar where he celebrated his last Mass, not far from Maximilian Kolbe's first altar, where he celebrated his first Mass, at which, by the way, I celebrated one of my first ones. It's in an Augustinian church in Rome. But anyway, he could celebrate until he left the church, but he could not transmit, because only a bishop can transmit. Therefore, all that came from Luther only has this other thing of faith and grace in prayer, relationship, but nothing objective at all, no matter what is the external. And the external in the Lutheran churches is very Catholic. They still face the other way, and they have fairly high liturgy. It's very close to us because they've not changed since they were reformed, but nothing is there. Nothing at all, sacramentally, except in baptism and matrimony, but that's not a question. The Calvinists are further away again. L'Église réformée, the Reformed Church, it's further away from Luther. John Calvin has a more extreme form, and their celebrations are less frequent than the Lutherans, but again they have the other one, relationship with the Lord, but nothing objective in the presence. We had a case, or this is a good while back now, but it's on record, that it was a case of exorcism in a German-speaking country. And it concerned, because it was an area where there were Lutherans and Catholics, the Lutheran pastor as well as the Catholic one. I forget exactly what sort of Protestant he was. He may have been a Calvinist, but it doesn't matter. But when he came to the exorcism, the Catholic priest, as one of his means of heavy artillery, had the sacramental sphere against the demon, or demons in this case. And certain things would make the demons scream and howl and do all kinds of strange things to the possessed person. And any time at all he brought close the Blessed Sacrament, which he of course had consecrated, the demon knew that there was something awfully, awfully powerful coming into his presence. Couldn't bear it at all, not one bit. Now when the Protestant pastor observed this, he decided to have a go himself and brought what he had kept, which is not the usual case actually, but he kept something from a celebration which he'd had, and he tried to do the same thing, and the demon just scoffed at him. So the demon himself was by that indicating the truth. Just as, by the way, in the relic of the True Cross that came to me through divine providence in my hermitage, because a close friend of mine was responsible for the relics in Santa Croce in Rome, and when they closed the foundation which they'd made from Rome, Santa Croce, they had sent a major relic splinter of the True Cross to them in Mexico, Guadalajara, and it didn't work out after some years, so they closed the foundation, but there was this relic remaining, so it came back to him, and he actually split it into three because it was big enough. Gave one to the remaining brother Leo of the foundation, kept one for himself, and he gave me one, so it came to the hermitage, and it's there. And he told me that this is authenticated by the demon, because it's been used, the relics of the True Cross, in exorcism sometimes. And one time, one of the exorcists, may have been Padre Amort, he was exorcising somewhere in Italy, Rome or somewhere, and he threatened, okay, talking to the demon, I'll get the relic of the True Cross. And immediately the demon started to react very strongly and said in Italian, not that, because it's got his blood on it. That's a demonic authentication of the relic, that anything with the precious blood on it is doubly powerful and potent against his power, because that's the blood which redeemed us. And by the way, in these talks the exorcists were giving us, they were telling us the power of the rosary, even the physical instrument of the rosary. It frightens the demon and he can't bear it. And it's one thing which is actually quite sufficient at times to send the devil away on its own. He just cannot bear that, because every time one is meditating the scenes which defeated him, he's being defeated anew, if it's prayed with interiority. And the invocation of Our Blessed Lady and the putting in evidence of the incarnation and redemption is an awfully powerful weapon against him. He cannot bear it. And after I'd mentioned this, actually last night, in a prayer group similar to this in Athboy, I noticed, having held a rosary in this sermon and showed it to them, when I got back to the room where I was sleeping, I couldn't use the rosary because it was in bits. It was already, it had broken. I was trying by bed to mend it and so on. It's interesting. The devil just can't bear the rosary. And it was a brand new rosary. So it's really interesting that you start talking about certain things, he just does not like it. And he does not like having the rosary around. So make sure you have it around, because for one thing, if it's around, it's a physical reminder. And if you, for instance, are saying the rosary, it's more powerful to use the rosary itself than your fingers. Even if perhaps it's less discreet in public, well, you won't die of it if somebody sees you fiddling around with a rosary. I remember being told that one time when I was novice master. We went on a novitiate outing one time when we were in a station of all place in Italy, and the novice said when it came to doing the office together, because we had the office books, you see, our own from the monastery in Latin, and I was going to just whisper it away, you see, with him at the station waiting for the train, and he said to me in Italian, well, let's sing it, they won't die of it, and so we sang it in the station, in Latin. Anyway, sometimes it doesn't do any harm to be not ashamed of our faith. And when you pass a church, sometimes things happen just when you make the sign of the cross. I remember one time I was actually in Tours, in France, and I was there, and I was praying to St. Martin, who was buried there, and I came back to stay in this small bread and breakfast or albergo or something of some kind where it was simple fare, and I just out of instinct said before, it must have been breakfast, grace to myself, making the sign of the cross, and lo and behold, it turned out on the same table that there were people from the Eastern Bloc, and they were chuffed And they had kept the faith in secret all these years, and they were moved nearly to tears to see that in public, things which they could have been persecuted for even unto death. But these things actually are not indifferent, because they're actually placing back God in society. So don't be afraid of your signs and signals, and certainly be careful that you don't switch off easily the rosary in favour of something else. E.g., it doesn't have to be heard what RTE is saying right now. Our Lady is more powerful, and the time is better used reacting against RTE than giving it another platform. You don't have to have all the time all the latest news, nor do you have to have all the kicks in a match to know what the last result is. It's time. So remember these things, and the devil knows full well that time spent saying and praying, not just saying the rosary, is extremely well used. So he'll do anything to get you to do anything at all rather than do it. Fill your time with wonderful things, but don't say the rosary. It's just another ploy. Now, with regard to the Blessed Sacrament, these good fathers, the exorcists, there were 4 chief exorcists talking to us, and they were telling us these things. That there is a time in the cycle of 24 hours when the demon is more at work. He has a whole reverse of what we have. As we have from 12 to 3 an hour of thinking virtually at least on what redeemed us, so they, from 12 to 3 at night, have preferentially their times of mischief, big time. And there are times in the year when that is augmented considerably. One is Halloween, another is Candlemas, the 2nd of February, which is a very ancient thing. Even in Celtic Ireland, the 1st, 2nd of February is something which goes back to ancient times, the sort of beginning of the rebirth of the year. And then you've got what is now, I suppose, St. John the Baptist. It's the middle of the summer there, and John the Baptist is being claimed also by the Freemasons, but negatively. And you've got another one as well, I believe it's the time when the darkness is at its greatest. It's round about Christmas, the longest, well, you've got more or less, yes, the shortest day, isn't it? And then Christ then starts to gain again over the darkness. But these are high points of satanic cult, and they have to get a stipulated number of hosts. It's all well organized and orchestrated. They got their orders from the top, and they have to have these hosts, and they have ways and means of getting them in secret. They're disappearing all the time through the tabernacles, and people aren't even aware of it. They don't take them all so as not to attract attention, but they look very carefully where the tabernacle key is being kept. So we were being warned as priests, the tabernacle key should be rather on your person than in an open box in the sacristy, because you're actually responsible yourself in persona for the way the Lord is defended or otherwise. And the very issue of leaving even churches open without people praying or adoring at all doesn't mean you have to close the church. But in our church in Cardiff, they used to have the church open at very long sections of time, e.g. each morning, all morning, but they would have a rota of people, even without exposing it, just to be one there at a time, just in church. They could do whatever they wanted, but just be in church. And it's just a way of not playing the devil's game, because all he wants is to close the churches. So it's just playing the game. No, don't have to. Just keep the church using it for prayer, but use it. Now, in the realm of the Blessed Sacrament, we were being warned of many, many things. You know that the whole issue of receiving it in the hands makes it very much more easy to abuse it, and they are being carried away big time now. There's still a black market of hosts, and they are actually quite frightening, and they try, if they possibly can, to get a big one, but it's very difficult to get one. Our Archbishop was approached one time by a person who had this to say. He had been in great debt and was needing, in a short time, a lot of money, and a Satanist approached him. Okay, we'll give you this sum of money if you do one thing. If you get us a large host consecrated. Of course, they can only get them from the pigs where they have the adoration going on, or where they will need it for exposition eventually, for benediction. That's where they will get it. So they won't get it if they want to, but they have to be very discreet about how they get it. But another time, somebody came to the Archbishop, it was either that case or it was another case similar to it. These hosts, consecrated, had come into his hand, and he thought, I don't think he was a Muslim or something, I don't know what he was, but he wasn't a practicing Catholic, but something put on his conscience to bring him back to the bishop. Now the point is, these hosts are all over the place, and they also have ways and means of handing them from one to the other in secret. One way is this: they receive it now easily on the hand, or if they receive it on the mouth, they can take it out straight away once they're sitting, and then they stick it under on chewing gum underneath. Now quite a lot of hosts are actually under these seats in church on chewing gum, but they could be actually consecrated, and they're waiting for someone to go around and collect them. So there's a whole system underneath. And there was an exorcism some years ago in the States in which the devil, it was Beelzebub in that case, was actually explaining, he was obliged to obey the exorcist while he was there. He was giving an account out of obedience to Christ the High Priest. And it was turning out that there was a complete order in reverse in the demonic world. Satan, the big boss, is a real king, and he has complete order. And there's the reverse of the seraphic and so on choirs. It's all in reverse. Therefore, he's the top, but then you've got the others, his satellites around him. But you've got some of the major ones like Beelzebub and so on. They are very close to the top. But it's all perfectly orchestrated, and they're all in complete obedience. This case was showing that this particular case, it was all done because the devil at the top had commanded Beelzebub to get into there with other ones. But that's what's happening. And it's the same with his minions on earth. Those who right now, through the powerful means of communication, are trying, for instance, to do a demonic work of bringing in sacrifice to Moloch, therefore to the demon, to get rid of innocent Irish children through abortion, are using the powerful means to do that. So by just switching them on, you are colluding, you are giving them a voice and platform. And it is perfectly well orchestrated. Don't you think there's just political stuff? There's a whole very well planned thing going on from the top level. And this is what we're up against. We're only seeing the tip of the iceberg. But right now, the devil is trying to get this last Catholic part of the world into his possession. And if abortion comes in, you can be sure that the divine blessing is going to be reduced. Ireland will pay the consequences. It is inevitable. As the States is going to find that it's going to lose that privileged part it has in history of being sort of a Christian land, able to keep order in the world. So it's going to find it's going to be in trouble, because the Lord can't bless and honour a land which does not bless and honour him, but enthrones the enemy of God. So, okay, if they want to do that, but they will find that economically things will get worse, there will be an increase in violence, there will be an increase in drugs, there will be a crumbling of the family, things will not hold together. Say what you like. In Ireland, Ireland has kept together better than many countries because the main blocks are still there. Kindness based on grace. Say what you like, Ireland is a good country to live in. People are still kind and considerate. It's still the fruit of grace. When you've had until very recently everyone aware of the gospel message, sort of, it makes a difference. It's not the same in non-Catholic countries. You've got violence as part of their system. You go down to Muslim countries, it's atrocious how women are treated and so on. I remember I had a friend in Dublin when I was studying who was a young priest. He had a sabbatical year to study for 1 year of refreshment course, and there he was telling us what things were like in the missions. He was in bed one night in the local village in darkest Africa, Nigeria I think it must have been, and the local police phoned him. Father, could you please come to the village green? Oh, what's going on? An execution. So off he went. He had to hear the confessions of these. There were 10 of them. So he heard their confessions, during which he realized that they were quite innocent. And what was happening, obviously, was that the police were making a model of them, but probably the police themselves were a bit involved. There's big money in trafficking drugs. So that's the way it could be handled. Get a scapegoat. And he then turned his eyes while they were about to shoot, and the violence of the shots of this firing squad was so atrocious that the pillar behind was chopped in two by a series of bullets covered in blood. And there they were expedited into the beyond in a matter of seconds. But at least they'd had confession. We don't do that yet here, do we, normally? So just remember these things. There is, however, a difference. Now, when it comes to this, Ireland is right now, therefore, on the brink of becoming a neo-pagan land, where if grace is around, either it's being badly used and therefore actually not leading to any good at all for the souls who receive the Lord in mortal sin. It just hardens and hardens and hardens the soul. And all the interior stuff is also, remember, not necessarily blessed by God. When you get a team of very powerful preachers coming and giving parts of the truth, and then in the midst, because they're already convinced by the good things they've heard, putting things which are not completely true, e.g. come forward and say one sin, there you've got a very open door to a whole parish coming out of a retreat with a feel-good factor, but in mortal sin. Because if you get people in coming up to say one sin, well, they'll say the most comfortable probably, and all the big stuff will remain in their system until death. A whole series of incomplete confessions until death because one crucial moment wasn't right. It's not good for the conscience and it doesn't give peace. They know actually that something is not right because their conscience is just not right. There was a child the other day who had this occasion. He was with the family in one of these missions, and he was making one of his first confessions as it happened, but he'd made his preparation and he had a few things he wanted to say, but certainly there was a second thing he wanted to say, and he was starting off, and the priest in one of these services truncated him. That's enough. He was not allowed to say any more, and he was very, very upset. Now, this is the kind of diseducation that's going on in the name of the church and contemporary thinking. So just be aware that it's not just the political thing, but the devil is so clever and cute that he's doing it now even within the church. So get this straight. Go into the quiet moments where the Lord is exposed and listen to what he's whispering to your heart, because he's very, very wounded. People who are actually coming lightly into his presence and turning what is a moment of adoration into something of self-adoration, drawing applause, cracking jokes, bringing down the sacred to the most banal, even going into bingo notices before the concluding prayer after Holy Communion, are not at all consoling the Lord. Even though we've got, as I referred to at the beginning, the maximum objectively, we can be less intimate with him than our brethren who haven't got the essence on the level of true encounter. That's the point, that we must not judge, but we can judge ourselves. Are we consoling or offending even more the Lord of this banquet? Because there are certain things which offend him a lot. One is that when we don't really even more make preparation. There are people who are coming very, very often to Holy Communion. St. Augustine himself pointed out as early as the 4th century that sometimes a better way of showing adoration and true cult in regard to the Blessed Sacrament is actually not always to go. That it can be a mark of respect sometimes to honour the Lord by jumping a communion. Now, that's going way back in centuries, but how has it got nowadays when people go very, very, very often, just as though it were a snack, and they then become more hardened to the maximum and do not even pause to make thanksgiving? They're straight away, as soon as the very short ending has come, talking. Now, you see, the Lord is actually really present at that point. Now, we have to make up for that, and the Lord is putting it on the hearts of people like yourself to do just that. Make up for it in adoration. Now, the best times for adoration are the night, because it is at night that things are getting out of hand. The night is traditionally the moment of darkness. We have actually in the Gospel of John, I believe, hic est hora vestra, this is your hour, et potestas tenebrarum, and the power of darkness. And when Judas went out, it's in the Greek a very short sentence, ein de nux, it was night. Why does he throw that verse in? It was night. When I was in Rome, we were in a red light area, and underneath us were these prostitutes. It was a posh area, therefore there were prostitutes who could demand a lot of money, so 50 euros a time, and there would be posh cars drawing up, all married people. And there we are, one after the other. And you see, this was something at night. That's what the night is about. Sin, Satan, things that the sun does not want to see. But it's also far more subtle. If all that obscure, fumy atmosphere is reigning, it means also that the devil is roaming around, pushing, 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 when no one is there. You look at what's going on. The suicides are nocturnal affairs, as a rule, when there's privacy and complete despondency with no one there, and certainly no prayer. The suicide phenomenon is extremely satanic, and it's being pumped to the maximum, partly, unfortunately, by the way that those who do it are beatified afterwards, even in church. Now, it doesn't give a good message to other young people. Now, when it comes to this kind of thing, remember, the devil tries as far as he possibly can to bring a soul down by taking away courage and then getting that soul to a weak point where just in one moment they'll do that last act, which is not the end but just the beginning. Just by chance last night I found a YouTube which you can, if you wish, and if you're that way inclined, find yourself. It is the one by Angie Fenimore, and she speaks rather well. And the title of the YouTube is "A Woman Went to Hell After Committing Suicide." She had an NDE, near-death experience, but she was dead. She tried actually twice, and the second time it worked. And she will tell you exactly what happened. And it's quite salutary and bears watching, because it's one of these cases. I've been there. And if you do, you'll see it coming up in the bar on the right, a whole series of other ones as well. There's one, watch this, if you want to commit suicide. This sort of thing. In other words, people who have got to the beyond and been pumped out or whatever, brought back. It's not to say that they're all going to hell, but the risk is certainly there, and one must not ignore it. And just be aware of these things. All the devil wants is to get a soul for himself. He has this horrible envy and hatred for the human soul, because he sees these souls taking his thrones. He's lost his glory, and it's envy to the utmost. That green monster, green-eyed monster of envy. He hates the human soul. He hates the means of saving those souls, the Catholic Church essentially. Split, conquer and divide. First of all, get them to bits through big revolutions, then within, divide and conquer. And that's what we're witnessing in our time. Just as in armies, divide and conquer. Divide and conquer. Get the priests to criticize the bishop. Get the priests to criticize the pope. Get the priests to say things which are giving a message of independence of thought. It's subtle, and it's not obvious, but it's subtle. But it's erosion by a process of fatigue. Get this message. Pump. Just push, push, push. And now we see it all over Ireland. The mode is to think as we hear. Helped, of course, by the subtle way in which the media transmit only one message and choose only one kind of defender of the Catholic Church, those who are not really 100% orthodox. And if they dare to react against them on high, who's blamed? Of course, the bigots on high. It's extremely, extremely subtle. Now, with regard to what we're doing, if we're aware of all that, two things happen in nocturnal adoration. We console greatly the Sacred Heart, and he shows his gratitude for that. It is there that he will whisper his secrets. As in the world, the moments of intimacy are at night, when two people are alone, so it is with the Lord. That is when souls feel the presence of their best friend and rest upon his sacred breast. St. John, it seems, heard that heartbeat. And St. Gertrude of Helfta, the great St. Gertrude of the 16th of November, she was made aware the Lord let St. John feel the heartbeat. And she was made the first propagator of devotion to that Sacred Heart, without the name. And there was a great intimacy with the two. The Lord would sing to her. Just think of that intimacy. And she enjoyed his company. Our own St. Catherine, too, was with the best of friends, and she would see him and know him and feel him and recite the divine office with him. And it says that when it came to the Gloria Patri, the Gloria be to the Father, she would go like this: Gloria Patri et tibi et Spiritui Sancti, and carry on. Now, these then are models of the other side that we can have access to as well. When we're there, especially alone at night, we're gazing at two big eyes of tenderness and love. And actually in this video of Angie Fenimore, one sees that. And it is very interesting. I don't think she was a Catholic, but she had this very strange experience. She was being shown where she was going. And then eventually she saw this tiny speck of white, but it was coming closer and coming bigger. And she knew that there was goodness and hope in that. And she knew somehow that that was God. And then, when it came closer, another form of light came and was right next to her. And she detected that was the Saviour of the world, who was saying to her, "You cannot take your life. Look what I did for you. And look at the consequences." And she was shown the consequences for her family. And eventually she was given a second chance, but of course she had to bear witness, and that's what she's doing big time, even with modern means. Now, I just conclude, in a moment like this, where the Lord is picking and choosing victims, he is calling us apart, wanting to claim back his own. So we must, e.g. now, when we have the Lord exposed, because I will consecrate a second host, remember that it is the same Lord who was saying in the Apocalypse, he's knocking at the door and wanting hospitality. As he said to Zachary coming down from the tree, he wanted that hospitality. He is saying it all unto us. He wants all our attention, and he does not always have to have a lot of e.g. background singing. I often find that moments of true Eucharistic encounter are even more intense when there's no singing at all. And in a prayer group like this, it's actually more powerful. You'll bear witness that at Holy Communion, if you don't do or feel obliged to do a thing, but do that, what you are doing, with all your attention, even wait for it, physical, because that's also a victory of the demon. And it's come out in exorcism as well, that the changes, some of them in our times, which were not envisaged by the Council Fathers, but were brought in bit by bit, with pressure groups pushing and pushing, taking away the altar rails and therefore obliging people to stand, taking away the choice, and then this question of communion in the hand, therefore not being handled by consecrated hands, and easily given to non-consecrated hands again to help speed up the operation, because it's all about speed, is something which the devil is largely pushing, because it's a great victory to have the communion reduced to a minimum of time, so as to get onto the essential, the parish notices, and get them talking as quickly as possible afterwards, so that the communion can have no effect on them. It also brings down the level of the distance, so that even children coming from the beginning can be fully indoctrinated into the equality of all. Seeing Auntie Jemima in a miniskirt hanging the Blessed Sacrament is much more of a glorious sign for a child's imagination than to see a priest well clothed and handling it only on his own. It's all discreetly there. Get the message to the children, it's only holy bread. You've got the whole of tomorrow in your hand. But these things that we still have a right to choose with regard to using our body to make up for the desecration. Because if we're aware that it gives more glory to God, even in our body, which the Anglicans, until very recently, never even thought of changing. They always kept the altar and had communion on their knees, which is interesting, that the Lutherans also, and even the Wesleyans actually, coming from the Methodists. It's a very interesting thing that we were amongst the first to change. Again, because the devil is pushing hardest where the truth in its fullness is. Now, however, you will never find any document which takes away your right. What the normal way in the Church, remember, is Holy Communion on the tongue. All else is by indult, because Rome was ceding to pressure groups, according to local episcopal conferences. But the universal norm, historically, has never been withdrawn and cannot be. It's on the tongue. So just remember that no one can take that right away. And the Vatican now comes down like a ton of bricks on priests who do. It has to be reported, and that priest will be disciplined. If any priest refuses you, report it straight away. Because the Vatican cannot react to things it doesn't hear about, but it is reacting to that particular very grave misdemeanour on the part of priests. And also with regard to communion on the knees, should there be a refusal there, make it known. Why not? No one makes a noise, and therefore massively the priests get away with it. But it's a right. Many people are aware that they should not really be standing when they receive the Lord of Hosts. They know it in their gut reaction. The Lord is infinitely greater than I am, and an angel automatically would kneel, coming into the presence of the Blessed Sacrament. I stand, I'm equal. And with regard to this issue, I often find that there is a halfway house which helps souls getting into the other extreme, which can be that of being so aware that if they want to make an exception, then they're thinking about making the exception and the scene that they're creating, and it takes away from their intimacy at the moment of Holy Communion. Well, just remember that John Paul II insisted again on this, that if one receives Holy Communion standing, there should be before an act of reverence, that is either a profound bow or a genuflection. That should always be there if one is standing. But there is the other halfway house which works perfectly well. It's that of actually making that genuflection at the moment of receiving Holy Communion. So going on at least on one knee, it's not a big deal. And if a priest makes a big deal of it, it's his problem. So I'm just making you aware of your rights, and also of what happens if you're into adoration seriously. The Lord will whisper these things to your heart, especially at night. Look how I'm treated. Would you like to make up for it? So that's the challenge I'm leaving you with, my friends. Listen to these things, because this is a very good group, and the Lord has put you together to console him, not to upset him even more.